Good morning, everybody. This is Of What Remains, and today we're going to be doing a sort of Halloween special about Marlborough Psychiatric Hospital. There's been all kinds of nightmare stories about it. Everybody I talk to about it has their own story to tell. So I've gathered up little vignettes to for the entire time it was open. It opened in 1933, so there's quite a few. This may bleed over into another episode, so let's just see. Hidden deep in the woods of Monmouth County, behind miles of overgrown fields and crumbling brick, there once stood a city within a city, a place where the forgotten were locked away and the echoes of their suffering still hang heavy in the air. This is Marlborough Psychiatric Hospital, a vast institution built with hope and consumed by something far darker. Between its opening in 1931 and its closure more than 6 decades later, thousands passed through its gates. Many never came out. Patients vanished, fires broke out without cause, deaths went unexplained, accidents that never quite made sense, and files that disappeared before questions could be asked. Today, we're going to open up those doors again. We'll walk the abandoned corridors where shadows still linger. We'll listen to the stories that refuse to stay buried. We'll ask what really happened behind the locked doors of Marlborough. Yeah, so we're gonna do this in a like sort of Twilight Zoney vignette style. Every year, we're gonna have a tiny little story about what life was like there, and the strange phenomenon that would happen that the staff would just have to accept. Um, so now you unlock the door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. You've just crossed over into Of What Remains. And I'm your host, Jeremy Vickers. So the first story takes place during the year it opened in 1931. And this one is called The 13th Bed. The new hospital opened under a gray September sky. Trucks rumbled up the dirt road, carrying 12 women and their possessions in brown paper parcels. The building smelled of plaster dust and field grass. The walls gleamed of chalky white that made the orderlies proud and the patients nervous. Ward F was the newest wing. 12 iron beds, white sheets, brass numbers at the foot of each frame. Nurse Reynolds checked the count twice. 12 admitted, 12 accounted for. By dusk, the generator flickered once, twice, then steadied. The women lay awake under a strange hum that felt too alive for machinery. Around midnight, a hymn rose softly from the far corner, an old camp meeting tune about mercy and rest. One voice sang it, then another joined, perfectly in tune. When the generator coughed and the light returned, someone saw a shadow on the wall that didn't match any of the bodies in the beds, a 13th silhouette, head bowed as if in prayer. Morning census still listed 12. The nurses didn't speak of the extra shape, but from that day, they kept on. They kept one bed made up and untouched at the end of the row. Visitors thought it was for emergencies, but the staff called it insurance. Every institution starts with good intentions, but a but as proud as a promise can be as binding as a chain, and maybe Marlborough first ghosts was simply the promise itself, the one no one ever quite could keep. 1932, the water that wouldn't stop. Steam filled the hydrotherapy ward until the air shimmered. Copper pipes hissed, gauges rattled on the tiled walls. The new treatment prescribed 20 minutes in warm water, 40 if the patient was agitated. One afternoon, Nurse Allen set the timer, locked the valve, and stepped into the hall for a cigarette. When she returned, the tub was empty and still steaming. The patient's robe hung from a hook, damp, but the ledger line for her room was already crossed out, with the note discharged same day. Allen swore she'd seen the woman only an hour before. That night, the water kept running. She shut the valve tight, then pressed her palm to the metal, still hot, still trembling. A drop slid from the faucet, rhythmic as a pulse. The sound continued long after the boilers were turned off, echoes down the corridor like a metronome. By spring, the nurses began leaving a folded towel on the rim of the tub. It was always wet by morning. Hospitals are supposed to heal by routine, measure, time, record. But routine can turn ritual, and ritual becomes remembrance. Sometimes the building prays harder than the people inside it. In 1933, the hand printed in the paint. They built their tunnels that year. Arteries for steam, laundry, and light. A fuse blew one night in February, sending black smoke through the vents of Ward H. Two women suffocated before the orderlies reached them. Maintenance scrubbed the soot, then painted the walls a fresh white. In the morning, 5 smudges reappeared on the same section of plaster, shaped like the spread fingers of a hand. The crew wiped them away. They came back by nightfall, darker, almost glossy. A painter tried sealing them under a coat of enamel, but the outline bled through. The superintendent called it a chemical bleed. The matron stopped arguing. She hung a calendar over the marks, and each month the hand reappeared a few inches lower, as if it were sliding slowly down the wall. It's easy to call something a stain, harder to admit it might be memory. Marlborough learned only early on that walls listen, and sometimes they answer back. 1934, the crying tub. Winter froze the pipes solid, but the hydro rooms stayed warm from the boilers below. Late one night, the attendants heard dripping from behind the locked door of room 2. Inside, the tub overflowed with cold water, though the valves were sealed shut. The surface trembled gently, disturbed by nothing visible. They drained it twice, but the day it was full again, a faint sound, half sigh, half sob, echoed through the drain. When the plumbers dismantled the trap, they found it empty except for a folded scrap of gauze knotted like a bow. Patients began avoiding that wing. They said the water tasted of iron, that the steam carried voices. The attendants started keeping their rounds quick and their prayers shorter. Every cure leaves a residue. The heat of the treatment, the echo of the cry. You can drain a room, but you can't drain what it remembers. Yeah, Marlborough State Psychiatric Hospital was a very creepy place ever since its construction. Just strange things happened that the orderlies and nurses would then have to deal with in their everyday lives just because it was their job to do it. And in 1935, number 17, overcrowding turned order into improvisation. Clots appeared in hallways, chairs became night beds, and in Ward H, the nurses ran out of numbers. Bed 17 sat in the far corner beneath a cracked pane of glass. Every patient placed there grew restless. They woke shouting, insisting that someone lay beneath them, whispering from inside the mattress. One nurse flipped the mattress herself and found only a water stain in the shape of a face turned sideways. During a thunderstorm, the power went out. When the emergency lights returned, all the beds glowed except number 17. Its sheets were smooth, its pillows indented, but still warm. Crowding makes ghosts out of shadows and exhaustion, but sometimes exhaustion is enough to summon something real. In 1936, the lamp that hummed, new treatment arrived that year. Insulin shocks, malarial fevers, science dressed like salvation. When one patient died unexpectedly, the pathologist stayed late to complete the autopsy. The morgue lamps, brightened under the bulbs, trembled. The hum was low and steady, like bees behind glass. The next morning, the bulbs were blackened, their filaments intact. After that, the hum spread through the floor, up the elevator shaft, into the wards above. The doctors called it vibration from the new generator. The nurses knew better. It was too even, too calm, like breaking through a wall. Progress always sounds like a hum at first until you realize the tune doesn't stop when you cut the power. 6 years after the opening of Marlborough was already two things at once: a hospital of modern medicine and a house that dreamed aloud. The charts spoke of recovery, the halls whispered of repetition. And through it all, the hum continued, steady, patient, waiting for the next decade to answer back. 1935. The hospital was full beyond reason. Beds lined the corridors now, headboards pointed or painted with numbers. Number 17 sat beneath a cracked window in Ward H. The woman who slept there never lasted long. They complained of whispering that came from inside the mattress, of someone already waiting within the cotton. One nurse straightened the bed after rounds and turned to leave. The springs sighed beneath her, no weight, only sound. During a February storm, the power failed, plunging the room into blackness. When the generator kicked back in, every bed glowed under the emergency bulb except one. Number 17. Did I read this one already? I must have. Forgive me, folks. The hospital morgue sat in 1936. The hospital ward sat half buried beneath the laundry wing, its tiles yellowed by steam. That spring, a patient died during an insulin treatment meant to reset the mind. The autopsy was done before the family knew she was gone. Newspapers called it an unauthorized examination. In the weeks after, attendants said the lamps in the autopsy room brightened whenever a gurney rolled past. By night, the light vibrated like a trapped bee. When power was cut for inspection, the hum stayed, faint but certain, a sound too steady to be machinery. Science becomes answers in 1930s, but answers came with their own ghosts. Every bright idea left behind a little static, still buzzing somewhere in the dark. This persistent hum through the ages was quite startling, I'm sure, for the staff, um, especially not even knowing where it came from. That's crazy. But this is Marlborough State Mental Institution. I think you had to be a little crazy yourself to even work there. In 1937, Ward F faced the fields. On cold mornings, condensation streaked the window panes. 5 lines forming first, as if invisible fingers were counting. For 5 nights, the pattern appeared, fading by noon. On the 6th, the patient in that bay died of pneumonia. The next morning, frost sealed the glass from the inside. The 5 trails frozen into place. No one scraped them away. The nurses just drew the curtains. Numbers meant everything here: beds, wards, doses, heartbeats. When even the windows started to count, the staff stopped asking questions. It had to be eerie working there through the years. Strange accounts with no answers as to why they came about. I know in one room on one day, 4 people hung themselves. 4 patients hung themselves. Another time, one of the main doctors, one of the head doctors, committed suicide in the asylum. I'm going to call it from now on. It was an asylum. Um, a woman named in 1938, a woman named Elsie spent her afternoons in the day room sewing dresses no one would wear. She always sat in the same chair by the window. After she died, the attendants left the chair where it was. Each morning, someone found it turned slightly toward the sunrise, as though she were still watching for a day pass that never came. Eventually, a new patient was assigned the spot. She lasted 3 days before asking to be moved, saying the chair knew her name. Orderlies let it face the window again and left it alone. Marlborough was full of quiet courtesies like that, small surrenders to the unseen. You didn't argue with the furniture, you just gave it space. Superstition was very heavy back then as well. If you saw something, you could easily read it in as superstition, something strange, and even the mundanely strange was became superstition. Needless to say, a lot of the orderlies, nurses, and patients, even the doctors themselves, had an uneasy feeling about Marlborough Mental Asylum. 1939. The East Wing rose 3 stories above the meadow. One wet November night, a scream echoed across the yard, and a body was found below an open window. The pane was nailed shut the next day, but only foggy mornings, a single handprint appeared on the glass from the inside. It always faced downwards, as though pressing to open what could never be opened again. By the decade's end, Marlborough had learned its first language, a grammar of doors that wouldn't close, windows that wouldn't stay shut, and echoes that refused to fade. The 1940s would bring the war, and with it, a quieter kind of haunting. Okay, so we're going at a good pace here, folks. For those of you who are wondering, I record this for um, 92.7 WOBM on Sunday mornings from 6 to 7. If you want to watch the live show, I record them on Saturday mornings from 11 to 12 on my personal Facebook page. And that's Jeremy Vickers. Just give me a search. You'll see my little avatar is of what remains. Friend me. And then if you have any questions or if you have any ideas, you can just message me, and that would be great. I'm trying to get um, my Facebook page for of what may come of what remains um, working, but it takes like 60 days. And my YouTube channel needs 50 followers, which is hard because all I'm doing is really streaming. But if you guys want to go to Of What Remains Mysteries on YouTube and subscribe to my page. That would help me out a great deal. Now, onward to 1940. Rationing began early at Marlborough. Supplies meant for paint and bedding went instead to the army hospitals. One spring afternoon, attendants moved the beds to scrub the floors and found a single shoe beneath bed 4, its laces tucked neatly inside. No one claimed it. 2 days later, it disappeared, then reappeared again, a different size. This happened for a month before the matron buried it in the incinerator, or burned it, I should say. From that day forward, she said she could smell singed leather on her walks between wards, no matter the wind. It's only the boilers, maintenance told her. But each evening, the scent grew stronger, as if something were finding its way back up from the ash pit. In wartime, loss became routine, so common that even a shoe could turn into an omen. The living counted their rations, the dead perhaps counted their steps. In 1941, the war had begun elsewhere, but the hospital heard it in every headline. Radios buzzed in the common rooms, and the patients began humming along to songs that weren't playing. One dawn, before the boiler came on, a hymn rose through the vents, thin and steady. The nurses followed it to the basement and found only the pilot light flickering like a candle. When the pilot went out, the hymn stopped mid verse. No one admitted it to lighting it, or no one admitted to lighting it again. But the next night, the melody returned, this time lower, as if sung by someone beneath the feet of the floor. Hospitals breathe, their ducts, their pipes, their power lines, all of it becomes a set of lungs. In the winter of 1941, Marlborough's lungs learned to sing. In 1942, a piano stood in the recreation hall. Ivory keys yellowed from years of hands. One morning, a nurse found a chalk line drawn across 5 of them, marking out a scale. She wiped it clean. The next day, the same marks returned, but one key lower. When the piano began to sound a single note on its own at night, they locked the room. The following week, the sound moved into the hallway, faint and patient as someone learning to breathe. Every building has a favorite note. Once struck, it hums through the walls for decades, waiting for someone to recognize the tune. There's that humming again on the repeated stories of singing or music playing or humming that goes on forever through the halls of Marlborough. This became commonplace for the staff, and you either ran screaming or you muscled down and dealt with it. In 1943, the kitchen went on full wartime rationing. Meals shrank, tempers grew. At night, metal lids on the serving trays rattled softly as if in conversation. Nurses blamed mice once until one tray was found empty, but for a spoon standing upright, perfectly balanced. The matron kept it as a courtesy. The next morning, it was bent in half. The night, the rattling stopped. Only the sound of the wind remained, moving softly through the corridors like breath drawn after hunger. World War II took more than lives, it took the illusion of plenty. At Marlborough, even silence began to sound like someone scraping an empty plate. By 1944, a new mirror was installed in the washroom of Ward H. It reflected every movement a half second late, as though the glass were thinking before it answered. One afternoon, it cracked clean down the center, and beneath the silvering, the someone had written in pencil, "You see me because you want to." The letters were old, pressed into the wood before the backing was ever fitted. They replaced the mirror. The new one blinked the same way, a heartbeat behind. There's a kind of confession that only reflections can make. In 1944, Marlborough was full of them. In 1945, the war ended. The sirens and whistles, even here through the open windows of Ward F, the women said they could hear a train passing somewhere beyond the trees. They waved handkerchiefs and sang the songs they remembered from the USO broadcasts. But there hadn't been a working rail line near Marlborough in years. That night, a whistle blew again, 3 long notes, mournful and clear. Some of the women began naming the soldiers they'd once known, one named her, one name per note, until the sound faded into fog. It returned with every east wind for the rest of that summer. History moved on, but the hospital stayed behind, keeping its own timetable. Maybe the train they heard wasn't bringing anyone home. It was reminding them that home was gone. Okay, so in 1946, in the hydro room, plumbers unclogged a floor drain and pulled up a ring of rusted keys, each a different shape. They cleaned them, hung them on the wall, and left for lunch. When they came back, the keys were gone, and the drain was rattling again. Every spring after that, more surfaced, smooth and thin, as if it used to, as if used too long. No one ever found the locks they fitted, and when a new matron took over, she had the drain welded shut. The next day, she found one last key on her desk. Hospitals live by what they can open and close: doors, cabinets, mouths, minds. At Marlborough, even the plumbing kept its own set of keys. In 1947, that winter, the radiators ran full, yet breath smoked in the air. Frost kept up the walls in loops and circles, pale lace against the paint. Maintenance swore the heat was steady, but by February, the frost marks that had taken on the faint shapes of shoulders, hands, even the curve of a face leaning outward. When spring came, they painted over them. By summer, the outlines reappeared darker than before, a memory written in condensation. Cold leaves its own gravity. The walls of Marlborough were beginning to remember not just what they held, but who. Yeah, it's crazy, these reappearing tales about so-called messages or markings that appeared on the walls on a regular basis, either through the paint after once repainted, or by frost, or by, the walls of Marlborough Asylum were speaking. Some might even say screaming. In 1948, the stairwell behind the laundry was narrow and dark, its concrete steps polished smooth by years of feet. One evening, an aide heard someone climbing when no one else was on shift. The steps stopped halfway up and didn't move again. The sounds returned every night that week at the same hour, stopped on the same step. Then the stairwell was sealed for fire safety, bricked over from both ends. Years later, workers walking above the site said they could still hear a single footfall each night, just one, like the building was testing its balance. You can seal a door, you can silence a corridor, but you can't teach concrete to forget what it carried. It will keep climbing, one step at a time, toward the sound of its own memory. Bear in mind, these walls contained madness on a massive scale. Um, there were sex offenders, there were just loonies. I mean, us normal people, or those untouched by madness, when we think of madness, we think, oh, this guy thinks he's Napoleon Bonaparte, or she's the Queen of England. But madness is more ugly than that. You had people, a friend of mine actually broke in after the facility closed down and found a bunch of patient records. And from what I remembered reading about patients who chewed off their lips, and people eating feces. This is madness. This is craziness. And these are the screams that reverberated off the walls of Marlborough State Institute or Asylum. I mean, this was it. This is constant screams, constant whimpers, constant wails of the mad. And yeah, these walls began to remember very quickly. Remember those screams. In 1949, at the end of the decade, the superintendent delivered his report. 15 suicides. 15 suicides since the hospital opened. The hospital opened in 1931. It's now 1949, and there were 15 suicides. He said the number once and moved on to the budget. That night, the nurses of Ward F laid 15 paper flowers on the metal trays, white, unnumbered. The next morning, the petals had wilted into the waxed floor, sticking fast like fallen labels. No one spoke of them again. Numbers were supposed to make sense of things, but in places like Marlborough, they only measured how much forgetting could fit into a single report. 15 became statistics. The ghosts didn't care what it was called. Yeah, this was a common practice for suicides, deaths, um, killings. Nothing was ever resolved, and the cases simply disappeared. That is how the asylum worked. Um, and that in itself was terrifying. The people who ran it were perhaps tyrannical. They didn't want the public to know about the horrors they allowed to happen without any kind of means to put it to an end. It's very sad. The 1940s closed quietly. The war was over, but another kind of battle had begun inside those walls. One against time, neglect, and the slow erosion of purpose. Marlborough was still growing, still hiring, still promising cures, but its stories had already begun to whisper that the real sickness lived in the building itself. The next decade would paint over the cracks with bright enamel, calling it progress. Yet underneath the hum of the old wards would only grow louder. Okay, so the next one I've got, we're leaping sort of quickly here through 1950 to 1955, the Echo Ward. After the latest electrical rewiring, the halls of Ward D developed a strange acoustic voices, bounced before they were spoken. Footsteps arrived a half second early. Nurses called it Echo Ward. Now that's crazy because we've already discovered that there are mirrors that move slower. Now we're seeing sounds within the hospital itself acting the same way, like time is being affected. One night, the intercom crackled on its own. The switchboard light blinked red, then steady green, then red again. Through the static came a calm, sexless voice repeating three words, all accounted for. The engineer tore the speaker out, wired it in a new one. The voice returned the next evening. Same tone, same message. It stopped only when the generator failed. then resumed as soon as the power came back on. Hospitals live by lists: beds filled, trays delivered, pulses counted. When the building itself starts taking roll, you start asking who's on the roster. In 1956, the quilter's pattern. Occasional therapy encouraged the women to sew. They pieced scraps of uniform cloth into bright geometric quilts. One woman, Anna, walked in silence, drawing her own pattern of uneven spirals. When she finished, she folded it across her knees and fell asleep mid-stitch. Her heart stopped before the next round. The quilt was stored in the attic. Months later, a janitor found it glowing faintly in the dark, threads shining a dull green as if catching light from nowhere. When morning came, the cloth was ordinary again. After that, the glow appeared whenever anyone walked past, speaking softly like a listening ear waiting for a lullaby. Some crafts are prayers with needles. When the hands that made them rest, the fabric keeps whispering that pattern. In 1957, there was a woman on the roof. Spring inspection brought reporters and a government photographer. Staff and patients lined up in the courtyard for publicity photo. When the prince came back, one nurse appeared twice, once in the group and again in the background, standing alone on the roof. She swore she hadn't moved. The superintendent ordered the negative destroyed. The nurse transferred to another hospital within the month, but visitors who saw the photo before it vanished said they could tell which version was the real woman. The one on the roof looked relieved. Cameras captured moments, but sometimes they catch intentions too. The wish to be somewhere higher, even for an instant. All right, let's see. 1958 at Marlborough State Mental Institution. A small stone chapel opened near the center court. Its bronze bell hung for hand ringing only. On still nights, the sound rolled across the grounds at exactly midnight. One note, clear as glass. The guard on duty swore no one was inside. The bell rope stayed neatly tied. When a priest came to bless the building, he struck the bell once by hand and said it sounded hollow, like something had already rung from the inside out. Faith isn't confined by walls. Sometimes even the empty bell remembers its duty. Okay, let's see. In 1959, I think this will be our last one for today, and maybe I'll continue this next week, um, so we can all hear about the strange happenings that um, were witnessed at Marlborough State Prison prison, mental institution, although it may as well be called a prison. Ward H walls were painted sky blue, a color meant to calm agitation. After dark, they glimmered faintly, a soft phosphorescence that faded the moment more than one person entered. Nurses claimed the glow outlined a figure near the far bed, a halo where no bulb hung. Maintenance blamed leftovers, luminous paint from the new exit signs, yet the glow appeared only in silence, as far as though waiting for, as though waiting to be noticed. Peace leaves residue even after hope has burned out. The ashes give off light for a little while longer. Let's do one more. We'll go to 1960. The Singing Tile. A new boiler shook the floors when it started each evening. In the corridor outside Ward J, one tile began to ring, a high, perfect note that carried for 20 paces. They pried it up. The sound moved 2 tiles over the next night. Within weeks, it had traveled the length of the hall, stopped at the door of the treatment room, and vanished. When the floor was replaced, the workmen swore they could still hear a faint vibration through their boots, like something humming just beneath the foundation. Every institution has a heartbeat. Marlborough had learned harmony. By 1960, the hum was music, and nobody could tell whether it came from the pipes or the souls who still believed in cure. Okay, so we're going to stop there. Next week, we'll carry on to 1961. And I also have a lot of cool stories that took place only in the women's ward. So we'll look forward to that next time. Until then, I want to just say this show is brought to you by the Jasper Spine Institute. The amazing Dr. Gabriel Jasper has pioneered these brilliant procedures where you don't have to live with pain anymore. So, give Dr. Jasper a call and see what he can do for you. You can make an appointment at 732-262-0700. And if you want more information about Dr. Gabriel Jasper, please go to jaspermd.com. Until next time, I am your host, Jeremy Vickers of What Remains, and we'll see you next time.